Hello everyone and welcome to the January edition of Payroll Question Time. It's the first PQT of 2026. I'm Steve Yardley, I'm the Managing Director at JJ Recruitment and I will be your host today, stepping in for Nick Day. Anyway, 2026, it's in full swing. We've stopped saying Happy New Year now, I think. So we survived Blue Monday. So January has now been downgraded apparently from grim to tolerable. Also, I don't know if this affects everyone, but there's only 9 days of dry January left. So if you're on that little journey, hang in there. And a word to the wise, anyone monitoring absence, the first non-dry day of January is a Sunday. So I'm not sure, but we may see a mysterious data spike on Monday the 2nd. In broader business news, Davos concludes tomorrow. So apparently all the world's business and economic problems have been solved. Denmark, however, aren't entirely convinced. Right, on that uplifting note, let's move onwards and talk about solving the real issues facing payroll in 2026. For anyone who's new to PQT, it's just a chance to get a wonderful group of payroll experts together to talk through what's going on right now in payroll and what it actually means in practice. Some of the key points we'll be discussing, the headlines will be the Employment Rights Act, statutory payments, the tax advice market, and AML registration. As always, this is your show. So if you have any questions that you want to send through, please put them on the chat. We have the experts here, the panel's live, and they can then respond live. A little bit of housekeeping now and disclaimer. The session is being recorded. We'll be sharing this at the end, and there is a follow-up survey after the show. Survey is really important. If you can and you get the chance, please do fill that out because it helps us shape future sessions. And a quick reminder, as always, this discussion is guidance and opinion. We know that there is rarely one right answer in payroll. It keeps everyone here busy, keeps them employed, and it keeps it exciting. So, on that note, I would like to, just a quick note from Nick, said he's sorry he can't be here today. He's sorry that I've had to step in, but hopefully he could be back for the next one. So anyway, hello from Nick and hopefully see him next time in February. Let's get through to the panel, the reason we're all here. So I'm very lucky to have a very strong group with us today. First up, Simon Parsons, Director of UK Compliance at SD Worx, very much a familiar face on PQT. Hi, Simon. Next up, we have Richard George, payroll compliance and operations consultant with extensive knowledge and expertise in all things payroll. Hi, Richard. And finally, Karen Thompson, head of payroll at Armstrong Watson, bringing a huge amount of real-world payroll experience and operational insight. Thank you all so much for joining us today and bringing a brilliant mix of insight and experience. So to everyone watching, use this expertise, get those questions coming through. It's why we're here, and we can go from there. I'm going to move on to today's agenda. There's some big stuff in here, right? So we will be covering, number one, the Employment Rights Act. It's a big one. It's something that's going to keep payroll busy for quite some time, and not just payroll as well, right? This is a big piece of legislation. So following through into that, statutory payments, and then tax advice market and AML registration, and of course, back to the questions and any hot topics. And at the end, before we wrap up, something new that was put through here, we'll also take a look at the 2026 payroll workout, getting ready for the new tax year and beyond with the SD Worx Academy. So while everyone's back at the gym working on their fitness goals, this is your payroll equivalent. A bit of training to get you match fit for 2026. Right, okay, without further ado, the Employment Rights Act of 2025. There's quite a few points in here. Looking at the royal assent, there's further details coming through. There's a lot to go through, yeah, and we've obviously discussed this. I've discussed this with a number of people before. So let's dig into that. And does anyone want to pick up on the first point on the royal assent and where we are on the status at the moment?
Well, I guess we've just heard a lot about the Employment Rights Bill for so long, and it's been going on and on and on, and then that's bounced between the House of the Lords and the House of Commons, Steve, and it was an element of would it ever end? And in fact, we've got some critical aspects for payroll that we needed out of the Employment Rights Act if it was going ahead in April, and there was almost the point of was it ever get passed, but eventually it did. And so I guess the Employment Rights Bill became the Employment Rights Act, I think on the 18th of December from memory. And at that point, very little actually came into law immediately. I think there was one aspect that happened immediately, and was that in relation to notice of industrial action. So I think there are some themes here, and I'm sure we'll discuss them around. One is industrial relations and unions, that one aspect. One is parental protections, another is employment rights, and then I guess we've got other aspects which we're interested in payroll world, which is the development of the Fair Work Agency, statutory sick pay, statutory leave maybe, and how that affects us. So a lot of it isn't really payroll, but I think we'll cover a number of those aspects. Is that a good starting point? And then they've set out a timetable. So there's a roadmap timetable of dates. So again, we think, oh, the Employment Rights Act is all in place. I think it actually changes old law and other bits. So it kind of isn't itself all complete. It kind of changes old and new stuff, and comes over, is it a 2 to 3 year period? So there's stuff actually February, April, October, is it? And then January, April, something like that. We'll go through some of those, I'm sure. I'll let some of the others have a word on the next stage.
I was going to add there, I think that's about right. However, Simon, as we know, with no guidance or very limited guidance, no actual plans of, well, yeah, we put it in, because I think the first one, just reminding myself, is you're right, is around the trade unions. And this is where, and I find this quite interesting that this government have introduced this so quickly, about include where there's no minimum service levels for strikes. So given all the pay deals that this government, with the doctors and everything else, it tickles me that they're going to, obviously the strikes now are going to be much easier for anybody and everybody to do potentially, because they've basically reversed what the previous government did. And that they literally said the previous government did lots and lots of things within the union space, and this government, I believe, with this bill or act now, have just said, yeah, that all's gone and we've gone back to what it was. So if we want to look at the Rights Act pre the Tories coming in, and I imagine this is what this will look like. But I think that's the biggest issue. While we were all waiting for it to reach a sense of it actually became something, whether we agreed with what was in it or not, we're still waiting, particularly around the payroll, the HR side as well. Of what is the minutiae. We need the detail in order to operate, and along with lots of other stuff, not just this, as you know, the detail, it just isn't there. And yet they've had so long to think about what it was they actually wanted to do, but nothing's forthcoming. So I don't know, guys. 5th of April, I mean 6th of April, just as I think it falls on Easter Monday. So yeah. Yeah, let's wait and see. Will we get it on Tuesday the 7th?
Yeah, and as Steve said, everybody would be drinking. As Steve said, everybody would be drinking again by then as well, so it'll make it even more.
Yeah, I didn't do very well with dry January, I'm afraid.
I was going to mention there should probably be dispensation for if you're in the payroll industry, like for dry January. I didn't want to presume. But
well, we work on tax years anyway, Steve. So January doesn't work.
There you go. I think it's the Norwegian approach is that January should be looking after yourself, and that includes drinking. That's the Norwegian approach, by the way. So
yeah. So I guess just to follow on, I think it's also very interesting some of the comment on delay. So we've seen a lot of conversation about will everything happen as the calendar that they've got. I think, as Karen quite rightly said, it feels now that a lot of things are being delivered a bit on the hoof. We saw with the statutory sick pay, which we're going to talk about, obviously, that we've seen some information now about transitional rules, but these are based around software development rather than actual guidance. And I guess the complexity of that, but also I guess the lack of knowledge around some of the other aspects. So we're looking about the flexible contracts, we're looking at 0-hour contracts, we're looking at a variety of other key issues that we just don't know enough about to be able to review. You know, the parentals have been hanging around for years, so we kind of knew the position of those more because of what was previously said around bereavement. But it's just those filling the gaps now with such a short space of time, for the likes of Simon and the like, who are going to actually have to create quite a software development, especially with the sickness.
For us, well, what do we tell our clients? What do we need from them?
Sure. So there's another little aspect of trade union stuff, isn't it, that comes in on the 18th of February. So you can say that's predominantly not payroll related, maybe, but it is HR related. So I think it's actually the 18th
as
of
well,
February.
Simon, because sometimes obviously
Yes.
you don't deduction from pensions and
Correct.
stuff, so there could be a bit in there as well.
Exactly. So I think we have this, what is it, 18th of February, removes the 12 limit for claiming unfair dismissal for taking part in industrial action. I'm trying to think whatever. Union vote requirements are reduced. Picket supervisor requirements are no longer there. Industrial mandates now last for 12 months instead of 6. Ballot notices simplified, political fund rules changing. So those all come in just under a month's time. And then we've got this block for April, haven't we? Which is the one that I guess we're really concerned with. And as Richard's saying, we kind of know some stuff. We're having to read between the lines. I've got to say, I've got enough information generally from a developer point of view, but the guidance is not really there. But there are a couple of still outstanding elements, aren't there? So paternity leave becomes day one right. There's a lot of confusion there. So I've had people coming to me saying, oh, that means they can have SPP from day one. It doesn't. It's talking about leave, not pay. There's still a 26-week. Ordinary parental leave will become a day one right. Again, doesn't have to be paid. We've got new aspects coming in which aren't related to the Employment Rights Act for Northern Ireland, but kind of align. Now that is a day one right. So statutory, I've got to get this right, parental bereavement pay, Northern Ireland, you could turn up, work for 10 minutes, lose a baby, and you'd be entitled to statutory parental bereavement pay. I think that's right. Whereas in Great Britain, you have to have been working for 6 months before you'd be entitled to that. And it covers miscarriage as well for Northern Ireland. So that's not in the Employment Rights Bill, but it all kind of aligns with the parental protections coming into play. And then you've got, again, union protections, so collective redundancy protective awards, whistleblowing protections for sexual harassment. I guess you could say that's employment rights rather than union-based. And then they're expanding gender pay gap considerations to include menopause. So there's an element of employers need to create action plans around the menopause and gender pay gaps. It's voluntary from April 26, so it's introduced, become mandatory a year later. Am I right in that one? And so just covering on those. And then there's these rights for unions actually to get into workplaces now and recruit members, I think, and allowing online voting. And we have the launch of this great new agency to replace an agency we've got already called the Fair Work Agency. So that's all going to be fair. And I guess we could do a whole section on Fair Work Agency, I think, because I think as employers, we may be all in for a shock because it will extend way beyond national minimum wage.
And do you know
how? It was obviously part of the sickness rules, wasn't it, that it would become part of their remit?
Yes, and holiday pay.
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess the other one with that one is it's very vague as to timelines, considerations, when do the powers, I mean, by rights, their powers are enforced from April, but
yes,
you know, there's no actual consideration. Nothing's come out from Matthew Taylor vis-a-vis what it's going to look like, how it's going to be, or anything accordingly. So again, we sit in a world where the aspects are there in the Act, but the detail certainly isn't, because we could also talk about 0-hour contracts. You know, we're not talking about not having 0-hour contracts, we're talking about guaranteed hours after X, Y, and Z if you're working over so many or have regular hours a week. But again, all of these aspects seem to be nice to haves, want to haves, but we're not going to tell you how you're going to administrate it.
I think as well with the Fair Work Agency, and I think I've said this before, my sort of not concern. I mean, you know, because this is where I think, was it the last government was going to do the single enforcement agency and then didn't go ahead with it. This is sort of the equivalent for anybody that wants, you know, can remember and is absolutely intrigued with politics and all the legislation that goes with it. But it's what level of skills will they have? You know, will they be able to take, I mean, if we take SSP as an example here that will fall under it, I mean, as far as holiday pay goes, it's like, well, it's ACAS is who most people go to, because there is no legislation other than the 2024 legislation in the UK. The rest is case law, so I don't know what they're going to base it on. But of course, employers haven't been necessarily, other than a tribunal in cases, sort of monitored for compliance of that. So who is going to do that? When you're looking at things like SSP, with the DWP owning the legislation, but HMRC have always done the compliance. So it's a case of, you know, who in Fair Work Agency is going to have the ability and skills to actually understand it. But then there's another thing here, because with the Fair Work Agency, they also say that they will require employer to keep records of holidays and everything else. Now, for those of you who can remember, whilst it's sort of, I'm going to say tongue in cheek, where HMRC and I think DWP, I forget which one does which, said some years ago that employers do not need to keep records for SSP. Now, in reality, you have some, because you know when somebody's gone sick, and you usually would show SSP on the payslip and or the offset. So you've got something there. But that's intriguing. What exactly, given that you don't have to keep records per se, what is it the Fair Work Agency are going to be coming in and looking at? So what records might we have to keep? And once again, we don't know. So, you know, is it just going to be people's absence days and proof that they were paid? But of course, you do have many employers who pay OSP rather than SSP. Well, obviously, it starts to carry up in the offset, but they may not show that on a payslip. They may just show it as OSP. I don't know. So it's more, again, and that Fair Work Agency, they're going to want to make their mark. You know, but it's a case of, my concern is, do they have the skill sets to do that? I mean, you remember, you know, many times, even with the, you know, after the JRS and the, you know, furlough, and HMRC started to do compliance checks, and the number of us here who were able to demonstrate that what the compliance officers were doing, they didn't understand the various sets of rules that phased over that period of time. I mean, gosh, we all struggled to understand them all, never mind those. And we were, certainly myself as a bureau, we managed to protect a number of clients that said, no, you've interpreted at that time, these were the rules. And that's, again, it's, you know, at what point, what skill set will these people have? And if they take a load from the agencies, well, who's then going to do their workload? So yeah, so it's just some thoughts there. But I was going to say with the menopause bit, there's a surprise, being a topical subject for me. Again, I think most employers are pretty good. That is, of course, where you know, ladies would want to share that kind of information, I might add. But just looking here, I had a quick look before of what, because again, we don't have guidance. But I think the plan is that at the moment, in the Equality Act, it's sort of, it's not a protected characteristic, but it's, at the moment, it's around the symptoms rather than it as being under menopause. And what it's saying is it will include formal legal requirements for employers to support employees experiencing menopause moving beyond informal. So it's around reasonable adjustments, health and safety risk assessments. Not quite sure how to go about that. I think I'd be mortified personally. And guidance and training. So again, it'd be interesting to see, you know, let's make sure that the pendulum doesn't shift too far. And this is it's a balanced approach that, you know, where women do need that support, it's available, but not all women need it and not all women will want it.
I think that compliance aspect you started with, Karen, is very important. If we go back to when it was going to be the single enforcement body, one of the key statements that came out was around the fact that they will have to investigate every question received. And if that is still the case, then that whole compliance aspect becomes very key, because as you said, are we going to be looking at a similar scenario to national minimum wage, where they can obviously go back past the 5-year requirement or 4-year requirement? And if you don't have the detail, you'll basically hang out to dry on the grounds that they'll say, well, you can't prove it otherwise. You know, if you don't have SSP records and they have made a judgment around your sickness or absence of administration, how open are you then to actual, I guess, zero reflective ability on the issue? So it becomes, I guess, a scenario where even if you don't currently, you'd almost have to consider that you're going to have to, on the grounds that you need that level of, I guess, liability or ability to be able to respond, because it could be anything. And I think
That goes
that's
back to
quite
Simon's
clear.
point, though, isn't it? Where is the guidance? This is what's lacking. You can't just expect an employer to suddenly change their policies overnight and communicate them and everything else without knowing what it is that are our requirements. Yeah.
That's right. So it's all, yeah. So it's all a bit blasé, I think, is the point that everyone's making. However, the timelines are set out, so there's an element of having to be able to plan to react, if that makes sense. So I think we've done December, February, April to a certain extent, and then you think, oh well, we've all got now a year off. Well, we haven't. There's then another tranche in October. So in October, that's when the P&O ferries recourse comes into play, that dismissal and rehire becomes automatic unfair dismissal in most cases. So that changes. Then we've got more harassment law, as if we weren't feeling harassed already. So employers will be responsible more for or liable for harassment from third parties, for example, customers or clients, unless they've taken reasonable steps to prevent it. That comes into play. Then there's all reasonable steps on sexual harassment becomes all reasonable steps. And you think, what does that word all mean? Legally, it's quite significantly more stringent, but again is a little bit woolly, maybe in what it means, but it means you have to take all reasonable. So that comes into, and then we've got changes in non-disclosure agreements, is it, I think, as well in October.
And unfair dismissal is the other one.
Yes. Well,
yeah, there's also the restatement as well.
Yes, isn't there extension coming in October? So the currently you have to make a complaint within 3 months. That changes in October, that you can make a complaint in 6 months. Sometimes there's an element of us thinking, because one other aspect is, oh, we've got changes in April 27, we don't have to think about it then. But actually, they're impacting periods before. Does that make sense? So you could make a complaint on the 6th of October, right? Because that takes you back to the 6th of April. So it's everything that occurs 6 months before. Whereas if you made a complaint on the 30th of September, you had to make that complaint 3 months. So there's an element of suddenly it goes, if you know what I mean. And we've got to think about that. And that's equally on the 2-year sacking, as it were, can't really do much as long as it's not discrimination, being reduced to 6 months from April 27. That in effect covers from April 25. Those people that were currently have been excluded are now shrunk down to October 26. So it's just thinking of those aspects. I think another aspect of the October stuff is tipping. So at the moment, there's a voluntary code on tipping. I think so. Those of you in hospitality that deal with troncs, etc., just be aware that tipping law gets changed again. So there's just being sure on what that is. I think that's more on employee representation, isn't it? And the requirement to keep on updating.
There is one more on trade union though.
Yeah, trade union, yeah.
And that's where, for those of you who are listening, who are unionised, employers will have to provide a statement to all your employees to inform them of their right to join a trade union and the right to access. So trade unions will have a right to access the workplace. However, there is an exemption or exception to that, and they can't access where those places are also dwellings. Lucky household. And it must be with a qualifying trade union. But I think the important bit there is, I think there's also, whilst it's not what I've got here that I've made notes of, I think there's also something, isn't it, because trade unions are viewed as being potentially funding political parties, that when they do have the right to join, that the individuals will also be given the right to declare they do not wish their union membership fees to be attributed to any political party. So just for those of you who are unionised on this call.
And somewhere in between all of that, you've got to do payroll and benefits as well. So
start now.
At least there's some consultation, further consultation going on, at least.
Yes.
I think I had one question as well. With the Fair Work Agency, do we know how well staffed the Fair Work Agency is? I know we discussed skill set, but you know, how many people are in there, and what's happening with that?
There's a chair.
Because they're taking
one at the moment.
They're integrating from 3 separate departments, aren't they? Really, at the moment.
Yeah, bring them all in.
So you'd suspect they'll put them all in a big room with hammers and balloons and see what happens, I guess.
I guess we don't know if the Fair Work Agency will be outsourcing aspects to, for example, HMRC NMW audit, or those HMRC NMW audit people aren't tax auditors, whether they're moved, so they move across to the Fair Work Agency. So sometimes I think, and it's something I get with sometimes the contacts when we're talking national minimum wage, they'll say, oh, well, HMRC know that we do this, but that's from a tax point of view. NMW is entirely different. They're not really connected apart from working for the same department. They're in a different sub-department. So a tax decision is not an NMW decision.
And it's also interesting where it sit. Well, I'll say it's also interesting where it will sit, because obviously you're looking DWP, you're looking at HMRC, you know.
And this is it. You've gone through such a breadth where we're trying to ring fence the payroll piece, which I think the next slide will really go for it, right? But it's so broad and so all-encompassing, and also it sounds slightly Orwellian, right? But but yeah, it's such a disparate group of specialisms to then bring into one piece, and then, as you said, there's only one person there at the moment.
Yeah. I think the other outstanding item for 26 is December. There's a change, isn't there? Which is the requirement. We're protecting those at sea under the mandatory seafarers charter. So that comes in to bring in extra health and safety protection for those that are out at sea. Then we're into 2027, which is another total area. Maybe I don't know, we leave that for another session, are we, or we can cover 27. I guess that no, there are some significant ones though, I guess, that even us as payrollers, and certainly with our HR colleagues, need to think about and prepare, and they will be payroll related, and that's the changes for 0 hours contracts, isn't it, that come into play. So compensation for cancelled shifts. So we may be in a point there where if a shift has been cancelled, you have to make a percentage payment of what that shift would be. I'm making that up because I don't really know how it's going to work, but that's an indication of you're going to probably have to pay a proportion of what they would have got if they come on shift. What proportion, I don't know. Then
presumably in arrears.
Yeah. In arrears, yes,
in arrears,
probably.
Which means for those of you who are payroll providers like me and Simon, you know, you're going to have to think about how you're going to get that from clients.
Yeah.
And, well, God forbid, even
Rolled up,
explain that they have
rolled
to do
up
it.
holiday. Yeah, rolled up holiday pay, accrual of hours, etc. for those council shifts, SSP entitlements, SMP, is it part of class one, pensions, I don't know, you see, and it goes on and on and on, doesn't it? So yeah, it's all
We've also
fun.
got collective redundancy then as well, and for those
Yes.
who are listening, whilst for most sort of single employers, let's call it, but where you've got multiple sites, under the current rules, it would have been possible, or it is possible. And I'm thinking for those in the education sector would be a good example, where your multi-academy trusts and things like that, where, you know, it would be a particular school or a particular site that you would look at for the number of employees as to whether you needed to do the collective redundancy. It's now going to be looking at the employer as a whole. So if you've got 5 sites, it's all 5 sites added together, even if you're only looking to make redundancies in one particular site.
Yeah, it's 20, isn't it?
27. Yeah, 27. So again, though, that's not that, as we know in payroll, and I'm sure our HR colleagues are the same, you know, but for us, we obviously process redundancy pays, your penalties and all the rest of it. It's a case of, you know, now you're going to have to start thinking about, does that apply? I think, as Simon was saying, we don't have all the facts, and it's pretty frustrating for all of us sitting and saying that. But I think we all agree we'd rather be transparent and not be saying, oh yeah, it's going to be this one. We actually don't know. But what we can do is say, these are all the things you do need to at least start thinking about. Does it actually apply to you? If it doesn't, great. If it does, though, you need to at least start preparing of what might I do? And then, like us in with the payroll and SSP, still sitting here with our fingers and toes crossed, hoping that something will appear before we actually have to do it. But at least we're ready for that announcement at midnight on the, well, the Thursday before Good Friday.
I think we've covered the slide. Well,
yeah, we're exhausted now.
We're exhausted. I did have one question as we go on to statutory payments. This was asking about if the home working allowance will be taxable from April 26.
Oh, isn't it altogether?
No, it won't.
Not if the employer's paying it. If the employer pays you it, that's fine, and you as the employer don't have to tax it. It's not P11D or P. However, as an employee, where you have been claimed, well, I doubt you've been claiming it, given how difficult it is because you've got to put it in paper format. But assuming you have been claiming it, I believe something just came out in the employer's bulletin, was it just this week, that said HMRC are removing all tax reliefs in relation to home working out of people's tax codes, because that's obviously how you, if you're claiming it, that's how they would give you the relief. So I believe they're removing that, but double check. If you do claim it via your tax code, just check they've removed it via your personal account or something, because otherwise you will end up owing tax. But HMRC, I understand, are taking it out.
Yeah, so if your employer pays you £26 for home working, that is tax and NI free and continues to be. In the old days, if they didn't, you could claim relief on £26. That's the bit that stops from April 26. So if you paid it, it's still tax free. If you weren't paid it, you can't claim it. That's
you can imagine a lot of this is to do with the millions of people who are hybrid working and have still been claiming it, because they've certainly been very vocal about it.
Yes. Well, the big challenge I think they've had is they've had a number of, which goes with our later discussions on the tax advice market. They've had refund companies making claims for people. Some of those people may never work at home. They've just been pushing people into registering for claims because they can get free money, and have done. But in many of those cases, the people have never had that tax refund, because the refund check's been sent to the refund company, who disappear with the money. And I think that's part of why these measures are to stop the rogue, or I can't remember what Martin Lewis called them. He had a special name for them. Tax rebate, something or others, scammers or something. I'm misquoted there probably, but retrobates, doesn't he call them? He calls tax rebate retrobates, who are refund companies. And even some of the people that did get money, they only got like 20, 30, 40% of the refund claims. They've been doing it for married couples allowance, working from home, business expenses that aren't business expenses. So nowadays, I think HMRC announced some time ago that you actually have to provide the physical receipts, whereas before there was an element of trust. And they've stopped these tax rebate retrobates from being the claim. And I think one of the areas was this, is they were finding that the people were claiming working from home allowances when they're not working from home. But rather than go through the mire, because we're talking small money, they just decided to remove it. So if the employer pays it, great. If they don't, you can't claim it.
Thank you.
Well, because you get enough of them, and was it about 125 quid rebate per year? Yeah, you can understand why these businesses have jumped on the back of it in the same way they have PPI and car insurance, etc. Because, as you say, that they're taking so much of it that by ratio they must be, and have done, probably very nicely out of it. It's very scary.
Yeah. So, yeah.
So, statutory payments. I think we could, this could be a big one. Statutory sick pay. I know when we were sort of briefing for this, I had questions myself, but if anyone wants to lead on what's happening with day one rights, 80% rate, transitional arrangement, please.
I think it should be Simon, given he's a software developer, and that's the only people that HMRC have actually talked to.
Well, unfortunately, along with another colleague at the BCS payroll group, we have been involved with the DWP, predominantly because we're probably like the rest of you, got no idea what to go on. So we had to, there used to be what's called a Statutory Payments consultation group. For some reason, they cancelled it in February last year because there wasn't much to talk about, at the same time as announcing the most significant changes to statutory payments there'd been. And it just didn't make sense. And we kind of tried to resist that. And this was brought up at the EPG, which all three of us really sit on, is the HMRC Employer Payment Group. We're on that consultation panel with HMRC. Well, they would take it on. They're taking it on, is discussing it for 10 minutes, and that's it, because they've got 20 other items to get through, whereas the Statutory Payments Consultation Group was it, you know, that was its whole purpose. But anyway, SSP. Well, I'll throw in another bit of news first, if I may, because it's in my head and I'll forget. Yesterday, it was released by the HMRC software development software team, and I've not seen officially where or what they're basing it on, that the small employers relief has increased to 9% from the 6th of April 2026. So that was confirmed in the release of rates for statutory payments, that as of 6th of April 2026, small employers can claim back 109%. At the moment, they can claim back 108.5%. So that's that bit. I've parked that, I've done that, all right. Statutory sick pay. So statutory sick pay for people who are sick from the 6th of April is formed by a 1-day PIW, period of incapacity to work. So the period of incapacity to work shrinks from 4 days to 1 day. So at the moment, you have to be sick for 4 consecutive calendar days. Now you only have to be sick for 1 day to form that PRW, and then for every qualifying day you would be entitled to SSP. So at the moment there are 3 waiting days. 3 waiting days reduces to 0, even for PIWs that are already started before the 6th. So if I was sick on the 4th, I'm part of a 4-day PIW requirement with 3 waiting days. When it reaches the 6th, 2 days later, that all stops. So now I'm on a 1-day PIW, no waiting days. I'm entitled to SSP for the 6th of April, if it's a qualifying day. The other sort of legislation areas I talked about is, well, what happens with that? Because that means a distortion for those who under the current default rule. But there is a default rule, and that's if you don't set your qualifying days, the government set a qualifying day. it's Wednesday. So if you were planned to work on Wednesday and you don't because you're sick, you would be entitled to a whole week of SSP, even if you only work the Wednesday, and that's right. But if you're working other days, there's an element of set your qualifying days. So at the moment, employers set the qualifying days and set them. If you think you're going to get caught out by Wednesday, change it to what you think. And the minds of DWP is sort of, well, have your opening days as your qualifying days. They don't have to be working days necessarily. They could be opening Monday to Friday, Monday, Sunday, Saturday, whatever. And then if they're off for a day, they get 1/5 or 1/7. So it's just consider that. And they brought in this new rate, which is if your average weekly earnings are under the LEL. So the LEL is gone. There's no lower earnings qualifier. Anybody, as long as they earn a penny a week on average in the averaging period, is entitled to SSP. And there are good rounding rules. So you think, well, if their average earnings was 1p and you're going to calculate 80%, that's 0.8. So what's the weekly SSP rate? With the SSP rate under regs is you round up to the next whole pence, 1 penny. They've got 5 days. So if I divide that 5 days by, into a penny, that's 0.2. What's the daily SSP rate? 1 penny is the daily SSP rate because it's always rounded up. That's the way SSP law is written. So there's this 80% rate comes into play for sickness from the 6th of April, but there are transitional protections. The transitional protections are if you are in receipt of SSP and that's continuing, so it's a continuous piece of sickness that goes into the 6th, you don't drop to the 8% rate. If it's lower, you stay, in fact, it goes up to the new flat rate, 123.25, because you are already on the flat rate applicable at the time. So it transitions. So when does that reset? It resets as soon as they return to work. So the next sickness is then on £123.25 or 80% of average earnings, whichever is the lower. That then moves into the other aspect of what on earth are we talking about average earnings? Because that could link back years if they've been sick within periods of 56 days for 4 days. That links. That what's the average earnings? At the moment, all we need to know is they qualify or they don't qualify. Now, anybody that didn't qualify, that disappears on the 5th of April. They now qualify. We now need to know what was their average earnings when the linking started. Now, software may know that, or it may not. So there may be an element of you have to go find it and tell software what the average is applicable. Otherwise, it's going to do a new average from the first day of sickness as if it was not linked, is the fear. So we've got all of that. And this transactional protection only lasts for a maximum of 28 weeks. So the longest you could have the old rules apply is to the 5th of October, I'm guessing, or around that. So 28 weeks. After that, doesn't apply. Everyone is 8% or the flat rate, whichever is the lower. Is that a good start point?
Yeah, I think that's quite.
Because I think as well.
Sorry, Karen, go on.
I was just going to say, yes, it is. And I was like, if for those of you, again, who are providers or you've changed your software, that part about the linking, you're going to need your HR colleagues, I would suggest, once we know what is the, what's it called, the not the qualifying date, the certified date, whatever it is they're calling it. Yes. What date do you use in order to go back 8 weeks? We know it's 8 weeks, but from when? But it may be that you have your software doesn't have it because you changed your software or something else. So again, start thinking now, because that's again comes back, we don't know what the date is, but start thinking about, do you have that kind of data going back however many years that you could get the data if the software cannot do it or it isn't in your software.
But I think you can take that a bit further as well, Karen, because you're looking at an individual that from the 6th of April becomes eligible. under the new 80% rule who wasn't before, but they had a sickness within 56 days. The sickness previously, there was no entitlement, so it is highly likely you haven't recorded anything.
Yes, exactly. I think there's likely that people who have said they qualify or they don't. The basis that they worked that out is dropped because you don't need it, because it's a flat rate, but it's no longer a flat rate. So you may have to go and find it. And the other thing is that then carries for 56 days, doesn't it? Because they have to have returned 56 days before linking breaks.
There's another thing for me which I didn't pick up, which was if you say, let's use an example, you went sick on the 20th of March this year, but you are not entitled to SSP because your earnings are below 125. As of the 6th of April, if you are still ill, you've become eligible for SSP. So is it only, I'm guessing it will only be from the 6th of April that your eligibility will commence. And then we're in a situation of what pay are we then using for that example?
Yes, exactly, Richard. And in theory, the thought is it's the original that you judged that they didn't qualify. And the SSP exclusion, which I think historically, if people remember the letters, I know they don't have letters these days, but years and years they had boxes A, B, C, D, E. I think the earnings under LEL from memory was D or E, and I'm thinking it was probably E, but it might have been D because I'm saying that from memory, is gone. So those exclusions are cancelled. So the exclusion is no longer applicable. You may then have to have considerations because they may actually be getting benefits, I don't know, based on the exclusion, where actually now they qualify for SSP. Yeah. So it's fun time. I think there's fears that we'll have the Monday and Friday sicknesses increasing. But on the other hand, I guess the government aim is the fact that people have been working when they're ill because they can't afford not to. And consequently, and I'm sure we've all come across it at some point in our life, we've been working alongside someone ill and 2 weeks later we're ill. And it's to kind of prevent that so we're not spreading, and maybe that's sort of a COVID type fallout as well, is to stop us spreading disease to each other. So on the whole, I think the government's eyesight is that this would be more productive, but our cynical minds, and I'm thinking collectively there, not expressing my own beliefs at all, our collective cynical mind maybe is everybody's going to be scarpering off on a Friday and a Monday. For other reasons. We'll have to see how it plays out. In a year's time, it may be great to actually see what happens to sickness.
I think again, if we could just have guidance, we would, we can't control the political table here. It's done, it's policy, what's have you. But even, that bit that you're referring to about what are the average earnings, what do they, that's the bit in the software, isn't it, where it's with the lawyers. It should have been, we have raised this and software, 14 months ago, that said these are the things you are going to need to clarify, and then to find software notes that, this hopefully will help you. Oh, but by the way, see this bit here, you can't develop that bit because we've got still with the lawyers. That's a bit I think that most of us, I'll say collectively, find very frustrating. Is that, come on guys, you should have had this nailed down.
I think there's a few, I guess, government mitigations that don't sit very nicely. Obviously the first one, as you just mentioned quite rightly, but then we have the second one where we have this group of people who will earn over £125 but less than, was it 150 approximately, who are going to get less. And the argument is, and it always has been, yeah, but we're going to pay you more sickness because there won't be the waiting days. Well, that doesn't really sit particularly well with quite a lot of people in the long run, should we say.
Yes, and I guess that's why they have brought in the transition. So if it is a continuing sickness, the transitional protection is there, so it doesn't drop. But for fresh sickness, it does. But I guess there's no matter how long that is. you're thinking, who wants to do phased return to work in April if it's going to drop the rate? Because as soon as you return for a day and then you couldn't quite cope and you go home, your flat rate drops to the 8%. Now, if you're above, whoopee, so what? But if you're below, you've just actually inflicted something on yourself unexpected, and the protection ends as soon as you do any work. So
and that's really important for HR to consider, isn't it? Because most people, I know that
yes.
I mean, you get into you're going to have some challenges there, because, you know, for HR, when somebody says, oh, I'd like, you know, the doctor says they're ready for a phased return to work, our HR colleagues in a position, and this again, for those listening, particularly for those of you who may be payroll and HR, or talk to your HR colleague, is they're going to have to potentially think, can they give advice that says to that individual, well, this is what will happen to your pay. So again, talking to payroll colleagues together, you may not want to do a phased return, but then you're also then putting the well-being of that individual where a phased return is beneficial to them. But are we going to be in a position where we need to make sure we're advising the employee of the, you know, the consequences, as Richard said, of, you know, of returning to work? So again, something for everybody to think about in advance.
I think the whole area of advisory as well is absolutely key here. You know, we're looking at now a comparatively short window to start with, but you have almost two tranches of communication here. You have a general communication to the business, which must go out, explaining the changes that will be coming into effect. But then you have an incredibly reactive lastminute.com communication requirement for those who are off sick and are likely therefore to be affected by the transitional rules at end of March, beginning of April. So I think it's a proper, real HR challenge to ensure that the right level of comms is going out at the right times and possibly to the right people, because we have a duty of care to them.
So we've got this kind of 6-month cloud of confusion, really. Come the 6th of October or whenever 28 weeks is, that kind of all ends. So the advantage of the day one single day SSP is that phased return actually becomes doable, whereas at the moment phased returns break the 4-day PIW. They've just disqualified them unless they plan it well. They've just disqualified themselves. So you can't work Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but you could work every Monday because you've then got a 4-day PIW, etc. Or you could work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but not work Friday, calendar day Saturday, calendar day Sunday, work day Monday, because that is a 4-day PIW and linked, so you're still entitled. But that sort of concept all goes. And from October onwards, well, from April, it's available, but you've got that risk of cutting back your SSP to a lower amount. From October, that concept all disappears. Everyone's going to be on the 8% or flat rate, and you can do phased Monday, Wednesday, Friday, whereas at the moment you can't. If you do,
another option. Sorry, Simon. Carry on.
Well, if you do, you've lost it, haven't you?
Yeah. But employers could consider during that 6 months, if they wanted to, OSP to fill the gap.
They could.
So, and this is again, you know, when we think about the overtime rules with the case laws for holiday, you know, it was some businesses said, you know, including all overtime, even though it was only contractual at the very beginning because of the admin burden. So it could be they say, do you know what, we can't be bothered trying to work out somebody's phase in return. Are they better or worse? What we'll do is, if they are worse, we'll top it up, and then we don't have to think about it. So that is another option that employers could consider, depending. And again, that's a case of looking at your workforce now, who is off sick, who might this apply to. So you're maybe going to be needing to do a bit of forecasting to see who might be, and therefore, do you know what, the burden versus the cost of just saying we'll just top it up, because you are only looking till October potentially. Maybe that's the option you could take as well. But that would be,
well, I guess that, and I guess that's a consideration we have to remind, and everyone here I'm sure will realise, but I do see questions on social media is under these rights. Okay, where do we get the claim back to the government for the statutory payment we're making? there is no claim, which I think sort of verifies your point, Karen, is SSP, OSP, whatever it is, it's all funded by you, the employer. The government don't fund any of it.
Which is interesting because it was certainly an area. It was certainly an area in the original consultation that they were reviewing at SME level, and that seemed to have disappeared very quickly.
Maybe that's why they've added this little 0.5% on, but kept the threshold at 45,000. Maybe that's why that is. Yeah, I will give you a little bit more here, but we're not going to help you with sickness. We've just increased all the costs, but we're not going to help you with that one.
So should we haven't touched Northern Ireland, I guess. Do we want? Yeah.
Yeah, the statutory parental bereavement for pay for Northern Ireland.
Yeah. Do you want me to cover that, or are you happy to tackle that? Oh, all right. So
that's yours.
Yeah. So the original statutory parental bereavement pay was a Great Britain law. And I know we're a very strange country. We're 4 nations that are one but not, or bits. So Great Britain, Northern Ireland is not Great Britain, hence why we've probably got UK on the back of our cars now, rather than GB. Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom, and Great Britain is part of the United Kingdom too, but Great Britain is Wales, Scotland and England. I could include there Cornwall and Yorkshire maybe, depending on where you originate from, but Richard says no. Maybe they're not part of Great Britain. But
Kengo is in the industry anymore, so we can forget that one.
Sure. But anyway, the original statutory parental bereavement pay was Great Britain law, passed at a time when the Northern Ireland Assembly wasn't working, if I put it that way. Is that a reasonable expression of it? I know it's a bit colloquial in it. Now it is working. Statutory parental bereavement pay then came in for Northern Ireland. In fact, I'm thinking, was it last year or the year before? I'm trying to remember. 2 years ago.
Delayed from the UK.
2 years after. But Northern Ireland, now they are working, have gone further, and they've expanded statutory parental bereavement pay to a day one right. So you only have to have turned up for work and then you're entitled to it. And equally, they've expanded it to miscarriage. Now that brings in a payroll change from April, because it's for bereavements from the 6th of April 2026. So it's not in yet that this new rules apply, or miscarriage, that separate reporting fields have to be used, and it's reported separately on the FPS submission to HMRC. And if you have a Northern Ireland case, so we've got this new SPBPNI, if it's Northern Ireland place, you have to provide the Northern Ireland workplace postcode. They all begin with the Belfast, because every postcode comes under the Belfast post office. So it has to, I think it's, I'm trying to remember what it was now.
BT, Simon.
BT, that's the one. So Belfast, they have to be a BT postcode, no matter where you are in Northern Ireland for a workplace. And there's also a miscarriage indication if it relates to miscarriage. So just to make you aware, I'm sure your payroll solutions are all being developed for that, or certainly are, to handle SPBP Northern Ireland. There was some sort of mute in the press, is it last year sometime, that they might look to do similar for the rest of Great Britain at some point, but we've not really heard anything more about that. Anything more on that? I'll leave others to talk about expansion of protections, maybe.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Yeah, so any other like parental extensions, anything around that, guys, we wanted to go through?
Well, the principle further changes around paternity, isn't it? So as Simon quite rightly said at the start, it's now a day one right for the leave on paternity pay, but it also brings in the bereavement paternity rules, which are a day one right for both. But the other key issue is, historically, paternity was not payable should an employer have already had shared Well, that has been removed as well from April. So you are eligible to have taken shared parental leave prior to requesting SPP. I think that's right, isn't it? Yeah.
Okay, so any more for any more? I haven't had any questions. We're on to the next poll, or the first poll. So a chance for everyone to get their questions here. Do we have the questions for the poll? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I saw this on somewhere else as well. I think it's a really interesting point. How prepared are you for SSP? So very, somewhat, or not at all. If people can start responding to that. Obviously, if you've got any questions to put through, let us know that as well. And yeah, the poll's open. So I don't know. Has the panel got any thoughts of where they're at with this? Karen, I don't know.
Well, I'm as prepared as I can be. The difficulty I have is for clients in the, I've written some articles on LinkedIn. Our clients are aware of it, but what I can only give them what I know, a bit like everybody else. It's then what we're going to need more information from clients that we don't need now. So, for example, our system would tell us if somebody, a bit as Simon was saying, the only thing we have to look at for SSP is do they qualify or not. If they don't have a PIW, that's it, end of. And we put in the date of sickness, and our system would actually do that for us anyway. This is where the change, and it's in particular the transitional arrangements, in that we're going to need dates. We're potentially then going to have to handhold and talk clients through the average earnings. They're likely to get queries from their employees of, how did you arrive at my pay, or whatever it is. So it's more things like that. So I would say I'm as prepared as I can be, very desperate to put more information out to clients, as I imagine every other service provider on this call, including some, wants to do. But what we don't want to do is sort of do scaremongering. We don't want to give incorrect information, only for it to change. So that's where we are.
Fabulous. Okay. And the results are in. Somewhat. I think we might have seen that one coming. I think most people will be fairly honest. There's a lot of people, well, there's a good number that are very confident, but there's more that are not at all. So 16%. I can't actually see the numbers on this, by the way, guys. But it feels that everyone's probably in a similar position, and we're waiting to see what's coming through. So thank you for that, guys. And as I say, if there's any more questions coming through, do let us know.
I think, Steve, as well, you're at a big crossroads at the moment. You're going to have a lot of payrollers waiting for their provider to give them the solution or what it's going to look like, or the requirements. I think you've got a second group who are, I guess, guidance driven, and without the guidance, they're not going to move. And I guess you've got a third set that it's just too early.
Yeah. I mean, I did. I put this in for my business, for JGA, across the whole employment rights piece, just to make sure. And I kicked that in December. We had a sit down with everyone that was involved in January to make sure that we're in a healthy position. I think it's always good to do that anyway, running a business, to make sure that you are doing the right thing, not just sort of legally, but as a business, and a sort of a moral piece. But there was a lot there that it's like, well, we're hanging, really. We don't know. There isn't clarification on it. We'll speak to our HR consultants. We'll do everything we can. And also, I think there's a reliance for us on our providers. So yes, to that point, there's we have umbrella factoring companies, those kind of things. It's making sure that their policies separately are up to scratch as well. But there's only so much you can do, I think, is probably the diplomatic answer. So if we move through to the next slide, mindful on time, and there's a lot here, right? So we've covered quite a lot, but the tax advice market. So new requirement for payroll to register with the HMRC, and the financial bill requirement for AML. Who would like to take this one?
I was going to ask a question, actually, which I know is unusual with the panel, but we really don't know everything. With and the reason I ask this, because where I work for an accountancy firm, so we obviously are already under a supervisory body. Well, our supervisory body at the moment is ICAW, Now, whether that then becomes the FCA, again, that's supposed to be happening, but I believe the professional bodies are still arguing all about that and trying to, consulting. But when it comes to the ID checks, and I'm sort of looking at it, maybe Simon and others do this, is as a partner, we've had to, even though we are registered partner, we've had to go through an ID check. And I think it's very similar to those, and this was new to me, this is why I'm asking the question. Similarly, if somebody has to renew their driving licence or what have you, instead of gov.uk, where I have my own HMRC personal tax account, there's now a gov.uk 1.
Yeah.
But there's only specific circumstances where you can use said gov.uk 1. And one of them for me was to prove my identity being an LLP partner.
Mm-hmm.
And to be frank, I never managed to do it. Ended up being corporately done because it was an absolute mare. And speaking to other people in the accountancy profession, this gov.uk 1 has been an absolute mare. And I wondered, does anybody know, is it using this gov.uk 1 for this, for putting through the ID checks? So this was Companies House rather than HMRC that I was having to do this for. But I just wonder if anybody said, because if they are, just be mindful, maybe look to try and register for gov.uk 1 in advance. I don't know, but Simon, do you know
I did
where
it
you're registering?
I did it because I was listed on Companies House, and it crashed 3 times, and also insultingly, as it was recognizing my face, it crashed, which I kind of get, right? So so I broke the government website with my face, and just me being me and being bloody-minded. Yeah, it was my fault, right, Karen? So, but me being me and bloody-minded, I tried for the 4th time and it worked.
I was just curious whether it be through HMRC's side, or because what, and I do say AI, it's saying that eventually gov.uk will go and it'll all be under this 1. So I was just curious then, because I think you might know this a bit more than I do.
Yeah, I only know how the process works now if you're HMRC regulated, and I imagine you're ICOR regulated or one of the other institutes regulated. Personally, I'm HMRC regulated tax advisor in my own right, not for SD Worx, as it were, and I do that through my own business account with HMRC. So if I log in, I can see my corporation tax, I can see my PAYE for any employees, that would be me, VAT, whatever. And one of the boxes it will talk about towards the bottom, I'm saying this from memory, is whether you need AML. And I think it's through that you undertake the registration and respond. So at the moment, Karen, I think that's still using the government gateway ID. So for Companies House, I will use the face breaking route, but for tax, I still use the other. But I think it offers you the 3 methods. What I haven't checked, well, that's not true. I have tried it. I've tried to use my one whatchamacallit to get in, and it says no, but it offers me all 3. So for HMRC, I still have to use the gate. Yes, I'm sure it will eventually. I'm not sure it's there yet. But there was at one point when I originally did my Companies House registration, I don't know if it was the same for Steve, although it recognised me and I had qualified for that. When did that come in? November, 18th of November from memory?
It was, yeah, it was around about then,
so I did it. When you went to go there again, it didn't work, but it does now. I know it works because, you've got to file the company accounts.
Well, I had our accountants just message me, go, you've got to do this. You've got to do this today. Yeah, which is probably me having missed some emails, right? So then I was panicking, tried it in the office, then came home, did it at home, and that's when it eventually, went through. It was reminiscent of the screen in Waitrose, the self-checkout one where you're suddenly terrified of yourself because you've the video. But it did. But then I've got now, every time I go to log in, I've got so many different ones because I also have to do the intermediaries report as well. So I've got so yeah, there's a lot of remembered numbers there. But anyway, it did work.
Yeah, it's only because we've still not got the guidance out, have we, on how you go about registering yet?
Well,
no.
Well, there's some indication. There is some indication of delay, possibly for, well, not delay. Delay is the wrong word. extended allowance for the transition for payroll, because I think they've now, I've been telling them for the past 3 years, however, they've now realized that payroll professionals actually don't have an option to be part of a regulated body because there isn't one. Now, Karen will say, well, she does, but that's because she's part of a firm of accountants.
That's the
Whereas
only
a lot of
reason,
payroll people, yes, whereas a lot of people aren't. And some of the institutions have been fined. I'm not going to name them, but there are some people that will be operating by some institutions who were regulators for money, anti-money laundering, that have received substantial penalties for not being a very good regulator. Not going to name them. All right. Now, hence why I think we were confused 3 or 4 months ago, because the government thing went out saying that a whole load of regulators for AML were going to be closed and you have to regulate with the FCA. And there was an element of the implication was that was everyone. I think the reality, it isn't, but it wasn't a clear message. So the HMRC, I believe, are still an AML regulator. I'm regulated by the HMRC, not via another professional body, but the tax advice registration is different. So tax advice is something that's coming in May. So you have to now register with HMRC that you're a tax advisor from May, with a 3-month transition. Might be longer for payroll, but that's speculative underground knowledge. So it may be longer, but at some point in the 26-27 tax year, if you're operating payroll services to other businesses, you need to be regulated. The prerequisite, that registration is not an AML registration. That's an HMRC registration to interact. And and sorry, I'm rephrasing myself. At the moment, I would say most of the stuff I talk to people about is not tax advice. And I help people with HMRC, both personally and part of SD Worx. None of that is tax advice. Be quite clear on that. It's not. It's trying to fix something for a client with HMRC. I've not advised them. I'm just trying to help them. Under the Finance Bill 2025, the definition of tax advice extends from 6th of April 2026 to if you talk to HMRC on behalf of someone else, whether advice is given or not, you are a tax advisor. Therefore, you have to register when the registration opens with HMRC to be a tax advisor, provide your owner details, blah, 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 who's responsible. And I think it's subsection 5, whatever, you have to be AML regulated. So it's a prerequisite. So there's an element for us to think, now the law changes, what wasn't traditionally tax advice, and the AML pages say you're not, isn't, now is. So now you're regulated. Who are you going to regulate with? Is that a professional body or HMRC? And in May, HMRC or a transition period over the following 11 months, you have to register with HMRC or they won't talk to you. Is that reality? I'm sort of putting it that way.
I was going to say, and the date might be important there, mightn't it, Simon, when considering registering? You know, your business might have been running for many years, but the legislation that applied to you was different.
Correct. And I think there's been some rumour, I don't know how true it is, but there's been some rumour that some bureaus have registered and received penalties. Don't know if that's fact. That might just be street talk as far as, or rumour. But the reality is you're not registering for the past, because if you're saying you're already doing it, they'll want to know why you haven't, and they will potentially penalise you. If you're registering because the law now changes your activity from non-AML to AML from the 6th of April, you're registering for the 6th of April. Is that fair to say? So you're not saying we already did it, we now realise we've meant to have registered, penalty. you're saying what we did before wasn't regulated. It's now been changed in the finance bill, so we need to be regulated from April.
I agree, whether it's rumour or otherwise. I think it was just one of those things where, you know, it's just a sort of highlight without giving advice, of course. You know, that date could be quite significant. So you are registering from the 6th of April onwards, not pre that, unless like us, you already are. And as an accountancy firm, we should have been registered. We are registered. If we hadn't been doing it, then we quite rightly deserve to be penalised for not following the rules before. But that wouldn't apply to somebody falling into this new legislation now. So it's just to be careful that it's not when your company suddenly was formed, it's when you become eligible for this new legislation.
Yes, but part of that duty, I guess if we talk about the duties of what that means, is AML obligations require us to due diligence all our clients. That will be all our clients, not the new ones that we're doing tax advice for. That's all our clients. So the existing clients you have, there is an AML due diligence process that you go through. So you might want to collect their, I don't know, driving license or passport or things like that, or identify who the owners of the business are and make sure they're not attached to a foreign nation oligarch that you're not allowed to trade with. So there's that sort of checking that needs to go.
Risk checking as well, isn't it? It's, you know, are they a pet, are they this? And it's a whole new world of legislation that you may not have. But you're right, there are things you can be doing ahead of time, which is if you are going to fall under this, you can start collecting ID now because you have to store it. You know, it's got to be kept permanently against those clients. You'll also have to consider annual reviews. So you might want to stagger how you do this as well, because if you make it that you check every single client the 6th of April every year, that's going to be quite a task. So you might want to stagger how you go about doing your AMLs. So as well, so it's just there's quite a few things for you to consider that you maybe wouldn't have done before. Accountancy practices should already be doing this. So if you are falling under that, you should go and speak to your colleagues or your COO or about that, just to make sure that is there anything you need to do. But if you've been asked to get ID documents for your clients, maybe payroll only clients, for example, this is the reason why.
And then I guess there's an element of preparing. Maybe this is something for the training organisations to consider, even within payroll, is tailoring some AML training, because you need to keep a record of your staff and their training over the past. And I think it needs updating every 3 years, I'm saying from memory, so that and that can be attending an HMRC webinar, because they do regular training sessions themselves. I'm not saying I'd recommend that as broad enough or specific enough. So you may want other training as well. The only problem you have a little bit with training is it will start going into money funds transfer requirements, which don't really apply. We're accountancy software suppliers, or is that right? Accountancy software providers, ASPs, is where payroll would fall, and so you need ASP. The other training is good, but it's not all relevant, and there are significant extra burdens on if you're dealing with property, foreign art, stuff like that don't apply to us in payroll. And the other thing about doing a due diligence, you may get a due diligence response at the high risk, and there's an element of understanding, does that mean we can't serve them payroll wise? And the answer is no, you probably can, because payroll generally is going to be low risk activity, I tend to say, unless you're doing something really strange. So paying their staff is not risky unless they're playing games with taxation avoidance, things like that. But
might be a bit, you might have to consider those if you're going to, we don't here, but if you do use them, if you do support umbrella companies, that might be a medium to high risk when you do it, so you maybe need to consider that.
So there's a client, what's their risk level? You can still serve high risk people. The activity, you'd hope that most of the activity we do is low risk, but understanding there are tax avoidance schemes, scams, etc. out there, so be careful. And equally, I think we have to, box what we do and what we don't do, within AML. So there's an element of making it clear to the client, yeah, I know you want us to switch off tax for everybody. We don't do that, sort of thing. I'm being frivolous, really, an example there, but I think you kind of know the sorts of things. It's, you know, how do I get a bung going for this? There's an element of, you've got to be careful. Plus, there may be obligations if you have got a client that's trying that sort of thing to report them to the NCO. Is it National
You
Crimes?
can't tell them that you're reporting
NCA,
them.
and you can't.
You can't tell them that you're reporting them, or that you suspect suspicious
Yes.
activity.
Well, and you can't do the transactions. So if they're holding you to a Friday deadline, you can't do anything, and you can't tell them you're not going to. It's sort of just covering that. All right, we've done that one to death.
I think you've covered it exceptionally well. It's the response I would have. So I think we did. We had similar, because the risk for us was umbrella companies, which is a huge piece, and it's quite a big legislation change there. It's in our hands in the sense that we recommend who people should use, trusted. However, we don't get to choose it, because it's, you know, that person chooses that. But and I always feel that if they're able to get you a better tax deal, there's a reason for it, and it's not a good one. So
no such thing as a free lunch.
Well, no such. And also for us as a business, doing business with, you know, good providers, you know, not just the umbrella and the factoring companies, they pay it back. They give us very good market advice, and it's a shared piece. So
that's, I mean, it's not to say that there are not good umbrella companies. That's the thing.
Oh, I'm saying there are very good umbrella companies.
And if there is a higher risk, certainly depending on your organisation. So for me, I'd have to say yes, there is. But I've looked at this, looked at that. Their accounts are up to date. The way in which they're operating their payroll is within the legal framework. We're happy, and that normally satisfies the ML, you know, the money laundering supervisors and what have you. So it's, again, it's not, there's nobody that's out of bounds, unless of course they are people that, like, countries that you're not allowed to deal with. And there's a list of those. But otherwise, very rarely, I've not refused. Well, I've refused one client, or potentially was going to be a client, because of the requests that were being made of how they wanted the payroll set up, and it was red flags all over it. It was like, no, I'm sorry, I'm not even going there.
And of course, we've got the new legislation, haven't we, with umbrellas? So at the moment, it's strange, because if the umbrella's rogue, and there are a number of them listed, but there are some that aren't rogue, so there's some that are genuine, but there are a lot of rogue ones named. If HMRC were denied their tax and national insurance, they came for the individual. They didn't go for the engager. But the new law is that the liability passes up. So if the umbrella company has disappeared, the liability passes to the person who was using them for the employment. And
yeah, I mean,
so it's a significant change.
It's similar to IR35 in that process map, the way it goes, which seems to have me sat at the end of it every time. So I'm super diligent. So anyway, thank you so much, guys. Mindful of time before we wrap up. I mentioned it at the front. I'm going to pop it onto the chat. There's the quick update for the SD Worx Academy, full payroll workout webinar series preparing for April 26. So I'm just about to, I've sent it on the chat, but it's also on the slides that will be shared after we finish today. So sign up links all there. I was just going to say one question for everyone. What's the biggest challenge we think we've got coming in 26?
Is that to us?
Sorry?
Was that to us? Or
yes.
The audience?
Yes, preparing for payrolling. That's going to be the biggest challenge.
Okay.
Immediate SSP, the biggest, I will say, I agree with Simon, payrolling of benefits.
Okay.
Yeah, it's one of those, don't leave it too late. Consider the application of vendors, consider the application of change, and consider the application of communication, because all three of them are going to be absolutely crucial.
Fantastic. Very, very good advice. Thank you ever so much, guys. Really appreciate it. Here's to January 26, finishing fairly soon. Look out for that Monday on the sickness leave, as we've discussed. Yeah. But look, thank you so much, guys. I'll leave you to it. Close out. Huge thank you to the panel. Obviously back in February. And yeah, we'll go from there. Have a wonderful day, guys.
Thank you.
Cheers.